This episode of the Juicebox Podcast is sponsored by Insulin, makers of the Omnipod, and Dexcom, makers of the G5 continuous glucose monitor. You can learn more about Dexcom at dexcom.com/juicebox. And you can find out more about Arden's insulin pump at myomnipod.com/juicebox. Okay, this is episode 121 of the Juicebox Podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, I'm going to speak with Kelli, and she and I are going to talk all about insulin. Initially, Kelli wanted to come on to talk about basal rates and temp basal rates, but the conversation just blew up from there. I'm telling you, this episode is crazy informative, genuinely helpful. I think you're going to love it. I think it's going to have a big part to do in how you handle your blood sugars every day. Listen, here's the one thing though. This episode was recorded like 6 months ago. So you may, if you listen every week, you may hear me say things that seem a little out of, I don't know, you know what I mean, out of order. But trust me, it's not in any way gonna mess you up as far as the podcast goes. Kelli's great. She's the mom of a kid with type 1 diabetes. You're gonna love her. You're gonna remember that nothing you hear on the Juicebox Podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. This is going to be one that you share. You're going to tell a friend about this one. I guarantee it.
My name is Kelli, and I have a type 1 diabetic daughter who is almost 12 and was diagnosed May of 2015.
2015, May, a year and a half about?
About a year and a half.
Yeah,
Yep.
Okay. So you confuse me when you talk to me sometimes through text because you mention your daughter, but then sometimes you say your granddaughter.
I have a grandson.
A grandson, excuse me. And then I see you in an image the other day, and you don't look like you're old enough to have a grandson. And so what do you do? You just collect people as you're driving down the road? Yeah. You take them in, or what's the deal?
As my husband says, we had kids when we were 12, so we started early. No, I'm 43.
Okay. That makes
my grandson he was actually born a month after my daughter was diagnosed, so he's about 18 months old.
Oh, no kidding. Wow, that's odd circumstances. Yeah, so that's, wow. See, that's interesting to know because you have a very I don't know what to call it exactly. It's not an average situation, right? So your daughter or son has a son. How did that end up working?
My daughter, my oldest she'll be 24 on Saturday.
Okay. So your 24-year-old has a baby.
As a baby.
You're all like, yay, but your son has type 1 diabetes. You're like, oh. And
no, my daughter has
your daughter has, see, Kelli, here's the funny thing. Let's go backwards to go forwards for a second. You and I have set a record for the podcast. We have been trying to get you on for 7 months.
It's been a long time.
We have scheduled and rescheduled. So I'm going to do my feeble mind a favor, and I'm going to write down daughter.
Daughter. Yes, I have two daughters. One's 24 and one is almost 12.
All right. Now, I don't usually take notes, but this one's been so long, I genuinely have to go back over again. And so anyway, 7 months ago, you reached out and you were talking about puberty and type 1 diabetes. And we're like, oh, we're totally going to talk about that. And that was September in 2016.
Yeah, we still don't have it figured out, so it's good.
I was going to say, is your daughter a woman now? Maybe we don't have to talk about it. It's been so long. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what happened and how it's been going? And trust me, I'm pretty much in the same situation. Arden is 12. She just turned 12 5 months ago. So I think we're fairly, in similar spots. So go ahead.
A little bit of what happened with
well, how the question of puberty came up and around type 1 diabetes and what led you to ask to reach out.
Her blood sugars I'm kind of noticing and still noticing they have like a monthly pattern, not necessarily monthly, maybe more like 6 weeks, where we go 2 weeks where she's so high and can't get her down no matter what, and then 2 weeks where she runs really, really low, and we won't even change anything during those times.
And that's not something. I'm sorry. That's not something that's happened consistently. It just began at about what age?
It was probably 4 or 5 months after she was diagnosed, because she was 11. Mm-hmm. Or no, she was 10. She was 10.
Okay. All right. So so you might say at the onset, maybe you were in a honeymoon period that went away, but it doesn't make sense if it's continuing on 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 2 weeks on. And so it's pretty consistent. Like is there any indication, or is it just suddenly you have to kind of dial back the insulin or dial it up?
I still haven't been able to notice like a consistent pattern. Like some months it will happen, some months it won't. And we'll also have like 2 months or 2 weeks that'll just be perfect. That's where it's kind of more like a 6-week cycle. Mm-hmm. But it's not 100% consistent, but almost. If that makes any sense.
Nothing makes sense because it's diabetes, so that's fine. But
right.
It's so I would ask you this, like as you're explaining it to me, I wonder, is it possible there's no real pattern to it, but you're inferring a pattern on it? Does that make sense?
I actually kept track for a little bit. The endocrinologist kind of had me keep track when I brought it up. And there was a pretty consistent pattern, but we would have like a random, week or two thrown in there where it was just chaos. Mm-hmm.
And so what do you do in that situation? When, let's say, you said sometimes things are perfect. So say you leave a perfect, and by perfect, I'm assuming you mean you use insulin, it acts the way you expect it to, et cetera. Right? And then let's say it all of a sudden, everything seems low all the time. Like, how do you handle that?
Give her a lot of juice boxes. I haven't dared to change anything just because I know that the lows won't last. So that's kind of when I reached out to you to try to figure out, do I make like a temporary basal program that lasts for 2 weeks and then another one for 2 weeks, or do I just mess with it as it happens?
Yeah, and it's funny. I think as you're saying it, I know what you're getting at. Like, it would be difficult to say, well, I'm definitely going to set up this temp basal rate for 2 weeks because I've seen that in the past. And I think that's where maybe all of us have at some point or another gotten hooked into the idea that there is a pattern to this. And we can just say, oh, okay, this 2 week low thing's happening now, so I'll just set up a basal rate for 2 weeks. I don't think that exists. I think that you could say, wow, we're in this kind of space where lows are happening, so I'm going to set some temporary basals up, even if they're just for the next 6 hours. Like just to see if that does it. And if it does, and at the end of 6 hours, she starts going back down again when the basal kicks back in, well, then maybe I have to keep it going longer. But I think you're in a case-by-case situation. I don't know that you can, I don't see a way where you would be able to say, I'm absolutely going to set up a new basal rate for the next 14 days. That doesn't seem like it would be possible.
Doesn't seem logical.
Well, at the very least, you don't have enough actual data to make that kind of decision. Like, for the exact amount of time it's going to take,
right.
You're randomly saying 14 days. What if it's 15 days? What if it's 12 days?
Right.
So, I mean, in my mind, so then it brings me to this thought, which is that some people are really uncomfortable making adjustments to their pump settings. And do you fall into that category or no?
I'm getting more comfortable. I'm uncomfortable making any drastic changes. Mm-hmm. And I tend to just completely forget that I can do a temporary basal at all, or stop a basal, or I'm not real good at that.
Right. Well, it doesn't occur to you immediately.
No, I forget completely.
I understand. So, do you have are you guys using any kind of a glucose monitor?
Yep. She has a Dexcom and she wears the Omnipod.
Okay. All right. So, okay. I think that, and if you've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, I think that basal's more important than we have given it credit for historically. Not that some people don't understand it, but I think that widely spoken about in public, not a lot of people talk about, hey, your blood sugar is 120, but I'm afraid to bolus because I think I'm going to get low. Why don't I just up my basal a little bit and see if we can bump it around a little bit? I don't think that gets spoken about a lot. And I repeat myself a lot here when I say that when I, when I interviewed people about their artificial pancreas, and they started talking about how their artificial pancreas makes more adjustments through basal insulin than it does through bolus insulin, that was just like that was a watershed moment for me. Like, that turned a big bright light on in my face, and I was like, wow, why am I not being even more so active with that? And then you start thinking about your body in general, right? Like, there's no way, I don't have diabetes. There's no way that the amount of, insulin my pancreas gives off moment to moment all day long is exactly the same every day at the same exact times. And so we've set up sort of this man-made situation where we said, look, we don't know how to I don't know how to fluctuate this. I'm not a pancreas. I'm not getting signals from my body that says a little more, a little less. So we've picked an idea that, okay, we'll just put in this much at 8 o'clock and this much at 10 o'clock, and that's going to be enough. But it really is just the beginning. So from there, I think you need to train yourself a little bit to think about the basal insulin a little more, which I'm sure you can do with no problem. And then from there, I think it's just a matter of how much time and effort you can give to it. Because, you could spend your rest of your life moment to moment being your daughter's pancreas. I don't think that's reasonable. But there are moments, you know what I mean? Like there are moments when you could more aggressively use basal insulin to make differences and changes. Does that feel logical to you?
It does. I will remember like 2 hours later and think, oh, I should have done a temp basal, but we're getting better slowly.
Of course you are. And I will tell you this too. I hope this makes you feel better. It's not like I flipped some switch on and started doing it. I forget sometimes, and it doesn't occur to me at other times. And there's just like you, you look up 90 minutes later and you're almost like, why did I not think to do that? Like it would have been such a simple thing to do right here. And that the answer to that is you're not an organ, you're a person. I mean, it's fine. But at the same time, if you can make it part of your day, I think it really does have a really grand effect on blood sugars and stopping grand fluctuations. And I just used grand twice in 2 sentences after not using the word for 10 years. So, which was kind of odd. And so what, I guess let's ask this, like, what do you think, is it just life that gets in the way? Like, why don't you think of it?
Yeah, life. I think I'm busy. Yeah. So I just don't. I mean, she's my youngest of 5 children, and I've got the grandchild that I babysit all the time, and I'm running around all the time, and
it's a lot.
Doesn't ever occur to me. Yeah. And I'm tired. I'm a tired diabetes mom.
I'm exhausted as well, as is everyone listening. No, I mean, listen, that makes sense. So maybe do this. Maybe say, I don't know, maybe kind of resolve yourself to start slowly. Like definitely think about it for meals. You know what I mean? And maybe you start with dinner and breakfast or something, or something that you can, something you can get ahead of. And when it doesn't work out, like don't beat yourself up over it. I try to get up and look at Arden's blood sugar an hour before she wakes up. Because
so do I.
Yeah, right? Because you figure if she's 150 and I mean her for her to be 80, I could get her to 80 in an hour. If she's if she's 60 and I want her to be more like 90, I could probably cut her basal back or give her 3 quick sips of juice and bang her up a couple of points and have her good waking up in an hour. Right. That doesn't always happen. There are times that I wake up like everybody else going, what time is it? What time? What is it? and that happens. So I wouldn't feel badly about it. I definitely wouldn't beat yourself up about it. I don't think there's a failing in any of this. I just think I think you got to pick a spot where it's most valuable and start there and then see if it doesn't become part of just the natural way of how you think about things until one day temp basals are like walking and you're doing it and you don't realize you're doing it.
We're really good at doing a temp basal for soccer and track. So I've got that down.
Okay. How do you do that? Tell me about
it. For her soccer practices, she tends to drop. So we temp basal her insulin off about 45 minutes before soccer practice. Mm-hmm. And then I turn it back on when she goes, and she's usually okay. For a soccer game, her blood sugar goes through the roof. So I actually give her about 50% more, starting about 20 minutes before her game and about a half an hour into her game. And it doesn't always work, but we're still working on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a temp basal to control what you think is going to be a spike, I would probably start sooner than 20 minutes.
Than 20 minutes?
Yeah, because, I mean, honestly, I don't know what kind of insulin you're using.
Novolog. Yep.
Okay. So, do you have a feeling for how long that insulin begins to work in her? Like when you set a temp basal at home, say she's, I don't know, say her blood sugar is 150 and you don't want to bolus and you set a temp basal, how soon do you start seeing that? Does the Dexcom tell you she starts dropping?
It depends on the time of day.
It does,
in the morning, it takes forever.
Okay. Well, so then if it depends, then if soccer is a specific example, then 20 minutes so far hasn't been enough. I would start, some people would tell you an hour.
An hour before?
I've heard, some people do an hour, some people do 30 minutes, and you'll trial and error, obviously. Yeah. And, hey, you know what, Kelly? Let's do it right here. Nothing you hear on the Juicebox podcast should be considered advice, medical or otherwise. Always consult a physician before making changes to your medical plan. Now we keep going. That's
my favorite part.
It's got, and Basal snoring. That's pretty much most of the emails. I love hearing the dog snore, and it makes me feel like I should just put a microphone on the dog snoring and start a different podcast. So, but nevertheless, you can, hold on a second. You want to do Arden's pre-lunch bolus with me? Hi. So
it's lunch for you, and we just ate breakfast.
The time zones. So Arden had a really strange day. She got up in the morning, and we had to change her insulin pump, and she kind of hung out here for an hour doing, I'm not embarrassed, she was doing homework that she just couldn't get to last night. And so it was a good time to change her pump. She had a big bowl of cereal this morning and everything. And so her blood sugar is good right now. She's about at 100, but she has gym right before lunch at school. So, anyway, so she loses her signal in the last 8 minutes of gym. So I can see it up until about 8 minutes ago, but I'm a little concerned. I want her to test here. And then I'm going to say test, and she's going to say, Dad, I'm trying to get back to gym. Something like that. Let's see what she actually says. I said test. This is going to be fun. Let's see how close I am to the truth. But, she got a significant amount of insulin this morning for the cereal and because we ate cereal after a pod change. So I was extremely aggressive, there. And so far, so good. Like I said, she hasn't gone over... Well, since we did the pod change, she hasn't been over about 120. Wow.
You find when you change the pod, you need to use more insulin? Is that why you're saying you were aggressive?
I say that when you, not just an Omnipod, by the way, but when you change an insulin pump, you stop the insulin for a while. Even I'm going to go back at some point and say to you, when you temp the insulin down for soccer, and you're shutting it completely off, I would love to see you shut it mostly off, but let a little bit run. Oh, she actually did test. Look at this. Without an argument. Oh, you know why I think we got her tickets to something she wants to do. So she's on super good behavior right now. Now we're going to bolus 10 units and extend. I'm going to put in, let's see. I'm going to put in, I'm sorry, her blood sugar was 165. So it has gone up since she got to school. So we're going to bolus 10 units, and I'm going to do 50% of it now, and the other 50% over a half an hour, because she won't actually get to lunch for 15 minutes.
I'm always so impressed with how you do this.
No, you just, I'm. Let me tell you a secret. Everyone listening should know I'm almost an idiot. This is just the one thing I figured out. So, otherwise, I bump into walls and trip over my own feet and things like that. I'm going to ask her to text me from lunch, but she won't do it.
See, and this is the other thing as I listen to you do this all the time, since my daughter's close to the same age and she's got her cell phone, but she ignores me.
Is it an iPhone?
She has an iPhone. She doesn't.
Find My Phone sends the most piercing, irritating signal, and children do not like to have that go off in school. It sets them right really quickly.
I send that to my 18-year-old son all the time.
It really embarrasses the hell out of him, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So
she's at school. She's okay with people knowing she's diabetic. She doesn't need to hide it, but she doesn't want to be interrupted. So we're still working on that. And I've actually had her listen to little sections of your podcast and go, see, listen, his daughter's the same age and she stopped and she did what her dad said.
Yeah. Well, 2 days ago, I spent the entire day sending Find Your iPhone signals to her. And she's like, I'm not getting my text. And she wasn't, I don't think. The delivered signal wasn't coming because the school has some pretty bad spots for cell coverage. But there are times when I get the all caps what back when I'm like, hey, how are you? And she's like, what? And I'm like, geez, I'm already married. I don't need you yelling at me too. It's time to spend a couple of minutes with the wonderful folks who support the Juicebox podcast by buying these advertisements. So don't skip through them. Cut these guys a break, huh? They're footing the bill. First up, Omnipod. Can't say enough. Loving it right now more than ever. You're actually going to hear me tell a story at some point today in this episode about how Arden's kind of wavering about her softball love, but that was 6 months ago. Right now, she is in the middle of playing for the New Jersey State Championship in Little League for the 12-year-olds. They're trying to get to the Little League World Series. It's very exciting. It's very hot. Long days. Doesn't matter. Omnipod is right there with her. On her belly, on her thigh. She wears it everywhere. And it is not in her way while she's whipping the ball around the field. And it's constantly delivering insulin no matter what. We can temp Basal down, we can temp Basal up, we can bolus while she's playing. This thing is a lifesaver, and it's out of her way. I can't tell you how important it is to be able to leave your insulin pump on while you're involved in a sport. It is super, super, super important. If you want to learn more about Omnipod, and I genuinely think you should, they're going to offer you a free, no-obligation demo pod. All you have to do is go to myomnipod.com/juicebox. You put in a tiny bit of information. The next thing you know, the demo pod is going to be arriving at your door. And then you're going to be like, Scott was right about this thing. It is magnificent. myomnipod.com/juicebox. My daughter Arden is 12 years old. Actually, she's going to be 13 next week, and she never sits still. Between school and playing right now in the Little League World Series tournaments, trying to get to the Little League World Series, she is running around with her friends when she's not doing that. The kid is out of her mind everywhere. She's always doing something. But even with her busy schedule, keeping track of her glucose levels could not be simpler. The Dexcom Share and Follow features allow us to be alerted whenever Arden's blood glucose levels leave the range that we set. That sense of calm and fantastic blood glucose control that Dexcom CGM helps bring into our lives is absolutely invaluable. So please don't wait. Go to dexcom.com/juicebox or click on the links in your show notes to find out more. I cannot say enough about Dexcom. It is crazy how helpful it is. Let's go over this one more time. Softball, school, hanging with her friends, moving, busy. Keeps track of her glucose levels, no matter what. So when you're finished listening to the podcast, please go to dexcom.com/juicebox to find out more about the Dexcom CGM. And then after you do that, go to myomnipod.com/juicebox to get your free, no obligation demo pod. My gosh, a lot of good stuff coming out of this podcast, including my conversation with Kelli, which is going to resume right after this snappy music ends. Back to soccer. I think you could do a longer one because, in case anybody hasn't heard us talk about it before, what you're expressing by when my daughter goes to soccer practice, her blood sugar falls. When my daughter goes to a soccer game, her blood sugar rises might not make sense to some people, but it's adrenaline.
It's adrenaline.
And for some people, especially, I don't know if you would describe your daughter as, competitive. But,
very.
Right. So when she's at practice, she's not trying to win. She's practicing. So it's very anaerobic and her blood sugar is falling. When she goes to play a game, it's still anaerobic, but she's also trying to kill something, which, puts her fight or flight in, and the adrenaline pops up, and adrenaline needs insulin. And so the biggest problem with bolusing adrenaline is the minute the adrenaline leaves, the need for the insulin is gone almost instantly. So I've had experiences with Arden where she's competing in something and we're bolusing a significant amount before a game, bolusing, not just basaling. And it holds her blood sugar at bay. It holds it at bay. The game stops and we need carbs.
Immediately, yeah.
Really soon afterwards. Yeah. And so, you can hear that and say that sounds like it's not a good plan, but it works. You just have to pay attention to it. You can't end the game and then just forget. You have to say, okay, now I'm going to be watching and again, having a glucose monitor, having a Dexcom makes all this much simpler, because then you can be aggressive at the adrenaline, keep a blood sugar closer to where you want it, and then when the fall starts happening, you can add a couple of carbs to catch it without overcompensating and et cetera. But the other side of it is, when you're talking about the lows for practice, I would say this: if you can find a way to do a decreased temp basal that doesn't completely eliminate the insulin for practice, in my mind, that's better, because your and my body always has insulin happening. And
right.
So you if it works, it works. And don't get me wrong, I've cut Arden's insulin at times. Sometimes I've made big boluses and I've thought, wow, that's way too much. And I'll shut her basal off for an hour to compensate for it. But if she's just out exercising and her muscles are going and everything, she needs a little insulin. So maybe instead of when do you set the offs before practice? How far before?
I kind of base it on where her blood sugar is at the time.
Oh, of course.
Because her soccer practice is, it's a horrible time of day. It's at dinner time. Mm-hmm. So she usually has a pretty good snack before, and then she'll eat dinner after. So it just kind of depends on where her blood sugar is. Sometimes I just set it off 50%.
That's beautiful.
If she's already running kind of high. But I typically try to do 30 minutes to an hour before practice, but then we turn it on. Her basal is back on while she's practicing.
Oh, I see. So you sort of restrict the insulin to cause an upswing in her blood sugar, and then put it back on to catch the upswing and hold her there through practice. See, and what do you say? You watch me do it, and you're in awe. That was way better than what I said. What are you talking about?
Well, we have that one down. Practice is pretty good. It's the games that we struggle with.
So that's amazing. So don't listen to me, first of all. That's just, and I would say, so what about how you handle practice, I think you just need to reverse engineer for other times, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so I think the biggest impediment for any of us is believing that what we think is going to happen is going to happen. Right? Like, how many times have you not bolused and then an hour later thought, I knew this was going to happen? You know what I mean? It's constantly. It's like, I knew this was going to go up. How did I not do something? And that's I think that's a hurdle to get past, is to start trusting yourself and believing that what you're seeing and what you've seen traditionally is probably going to happen again. And then lean on the technology a little bit if it doesn't happen, Do
it, yeah. With your daughter's games, because my daughter plays competitive soccer. So the trick that comes with the soccer game is they practice for 45 minutes before the game starts. And sometimes she will drop during that 45-minute practice. So that's why I waited to, give her the insulin that I know the adrenaline spike will cause. So that's where we have
you have a big gap right there.
Yeah. It's the tricky part is that 45-minute warm-up. I was giving her the temp basal to make up for the adrenaline in the game, but she was dropping because of that practice beforehand. Sometimes.
What's your
goal? Not always.
What's your goal for blood sugar while she's playing? Like, if it was right where you wanted it to be and you weren't afraid of it rising or falling, where would you want it?
You know what? She plays the very best when she's like 90 to 120. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's okay if she's 150 to 180, but she plays beautifully when she's 90 to 120.
Yeah, you can see her body working better and like running and like this, all that seems smoother. And
she doesn't get tired. She plays defense, so she never comes out. She plays the entire game.
Right.
So.
Oh, that's difficult. I mean, listen, Arden plays softball, and that's not the same. It's the softball is more about the heat and the amount of hours that go into it. Sometimes they play, a good portion of a very hot day. And it's funny that we're sort of talking about puberty and that the sports are coming up too, because in my house very recently, I've been hearing I don't know if I like playing softball, like chants a little bit.
Oh, wow.
And so she really is changing. Like Arden is turning into a lady. And so, I think that it's possible that a lot of the things in her life are going to change, not just physiological stuff, but where her likes and dislikes stayed. And she was telling me, she's like, I love playing softball, and then she started saying, I don't like going to all these wintertime practices. Yeah. And it's it's this conversation about, when people, sometimes I think people hear, you or I or other people say like, oh, my kid plays a competitive sport. And they're probably like, my kid plays a sport and it's competitive. And what you mean, it's not recreational, right? It's more intense or more time consuming or whatever.
Yeah. Soccer is 2 to 3 times a week, 12 months out of the year. We do not get a break. And in between there, she plays basketball and she runs track. She's very athletic, loves her sport.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's exactly how I would have described Arden 4 months ago. Like, she loves it. You never have to ask her to go. She's always excited to be there. She's happy while she's there. She loves playing. And now she loves playing, but I think she wishes she could show up at the field 5 seconds before the game starts, warm up and play. Like, don't, and it's not that she thinks she's special or she's great, and she certainly isn't. And I think it's just that her interests are fragmenting. And so I do wonder if how much puberty doesn't have an effect on that, and so, but to her blood sugars in puberty, it really is back and forth. I think we're very close to, a time I'm hoping not to ever see. I think
that you've been dreading.
Yeah. I think that's coming. And I just mean it for blood sugars, not for anything else. But, I think it's coming, and so far, as I see her growing and developing, and she has out of nowhere required much more insulin, for days at a time, and and a significant amount more than I've ever been accustomed to giving her in the past. And what I can say is that whether there was one growth period where I think we went into an endo appointment in the end of September, and then we went back. Maybe it was the beginning of October, more like mid-October, because when we went back, it was in January. And in that period of time, Thanksgiving happened, Christmas happened, and Arden grew 1.5 inches in 90 days. And I kept her A1C at like 6.1. I'm telling you that when I got there, I sat down, I looked that endo straight in the face, and I said, oh, not the endo, we never get to see the endo, the nurse practitioner. And I looked her straight in the face. I assume Arden has an endocrinologist. I looked the nurse practitioner straight in the face, and I was like, this is it. Her A1C is going up. And I started telling her about, besides all the holiday stuff and the running around and being less focused on, bolusing and basaling and things like that, I said, Arden has been growing like crazy and her insulin needs are insane. And I think I figured out what to do too late, I told her. Excuse me, I'll take a drink. I said, I think I figured it out too late. I think I have it now, but I figured it out too late. And she's like, well, what do you mean? What are you doing? And I was like, I am just being ultra aggressive with the insulin. Like, I said, if the diabetes is aggressive with me, I'm twice as aggressive back with it. I'm just not accepting a rise. I'm not accepting a blood sugar that's high and sits there. And that's when I started really thinking about the idea of it being simpler to stop a low than it is to affect a high. And like, that's when that all kind of hit me. And then she got her A1C back, and it was the same. It was 6.1.
Oh, nice.
And she was just like, I can't believe that through a growth spurt over a holiday, you kept her A1C where it was. And
we just had that same situation last week. But ours did not turn out as lovely.
Well, but you're also 18 months into it. When I was 18 months into it, let me paint a picture for you. And this is for the person who texted me the other day, or sent me a message the other day and said that sometimes the podcast makes them feel bad. So let me be very clear about how perfect I'm not. 18 months into diabetes, I got Arden's A1C to move from like 9.1 to 8.9. That effort caused me to embrace the nurse practitioner in the lobby of the office and cry. So that was such I was like, I did it, it moved. And then I felt like I wasn't killing her. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I've been a stay-at-home dad now for 17 years. It is always me and a bunch of ladies wherever I am during the day, Right. And so there I'm in the lobby, and my nurse practitioner's like, do you want a hug? And I'm like, I think so. And and so there have been plenty of times. If you're comfortable telling me what it didn't turn out not so great means to you, I think the picture I'd like to paint, if I'm right, is that you're probably literally years and years and years ahead of where I was at 18 months. So what happened?
Well, it was actually better than I expected, but it did move. Our scenario was we went on a cruise right after Thanksgiving, and her blood sugars were, we had probably a 24-hour period where we were fighting 300 on that cruise, and I still don't know why.
Right.
We were aggressive with the insulin, but it just would not move, and the whole cruise was kind of like that, even when we got off the boat and exercised. And then we had Christmas, and she in Utah, where we're from, I don't know if this happens everywhere, but we have year-round school. So they go to school for 9 weeks, and then they're home for 3.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a summer, and you know how their blood sugars are different during the summer. Mm-hmm. So she's also off track, and she's home. So we've got high blood sugars there, and then we got, candy from Christmas and all that. Anyway, she went from a 6.4 to a 7.1. So it wasn't bad, but I was expecting like a 9. So I was happy.
Thought it was going to be 23. You're like, that's it. It's over.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So we accepted 7.1. 7.1 is still great.
It's a lovely A1C. Yes.
Yeah, but it did go up.
I think that I hope people don't misunderstand. I'm sure that some do and some don't. But when I say that Arden's A1C has been between 5.8 and like 6.2 for 3 years, that the number's not important to me. It's the consistency that I think is important. Right. Like, so because like I've said it before, like, I tell people, like, if you have a CGM, please don't set the high threshold line too high because, then you're up and down and there's too much variability. You can't react quick enough to stop the variability. And so when I say that her A1C is in this space, my point is that once you get it wherever it is, you can keep it there. Like when her A1C was 9, I had no trouble keeping it at 9. Whatever I was doing was keeping it around 9. When I got it to 8, whatever I was doing, it kept it at 8. When I got it to 7, whatever I was doing, kept it there. And now that it's down to where it is, whatever I'm doing is keeping it there. And so it's a bigger idea and at the same time a very simple thought. Like, wherever you are, once you figure out how to stop the variability, the up and down, you can stay in that space. And that is what we're still struggling with, and I'm blaming it on puberty. But maybe I shouldn't be. Okay. So that's the name of this episode. It's not puberty's fault. But it is. It's got to be somebody's fault, damn it, Kelly. Exactly, and it's not mine. Story of my life right there. No, so, we'll have a great blood sugar. We are typically we go from a 6, and then 3 months later we're in the 8s, and then we go back to the 6s and the 8s. So I was happy that we were just at a 7. Yeah, sure. But I think part of it's that I don't dare to make the big changes, and that 2 weeks that I see those crazy highs, I'm scared to give her too much insulin. I'll give her more, but I'm afraid to give her too much. Okay, so then that's where I would say to you, not to oversimplify something that's so complicated, but you do have to start with this simple notion. If your blood sugar is too low, you have too much insulin or you've mistimed it, and if your blood sugar is too high, you have too little insulin or you have mistimed it. It pretty much, don't get me wrong. If your pump falls off, your blood sugar is high because you're not getting insulin. Right. But within the concepts of this idea, when she's high, she needs more. It doesn't matter why. Like, I watched this. I'm going to click on something. I'm sorry for clicking while we're talking because I want to get something that I posted online and directly talk about it. But I saw someone speaking one time and they're like, I don't understand why my daughter's blood sugar is high. And she's talking and talking and talking about it. And I finally got on and said, it doesn't matter why. Figure that out later. Like, I know you don't want it to happen again, but in the moment, it's too high. There's not enough insulin. Whatever the reason is unimportant. And at this moment, we'd like to know, for the future so we can stop it from happening again. And I think you're in that situation. You get into a sustained high blood sugar and you don't want, it sounds to me like you don't want to do the wrong thing and have it go the opposite way too far. But to that I say, start with half. You know what I mean? If you're already doing half, do a little more. Like mix a temp basal increase with a bolus. I find that can sometimes be a valuable way to move a high blood sugar. Yeah, I got to start using those temp basals. Yeah. Like because think about it, right? Like, so say, like the point we made earlier in the podcast, which is, let's say that you need a half a unit as your basal insulin an hour at 3:00 in the afternoon. It's always like that. But all of a sudden, your blood sugar is really high, but you haven't eaten anything. Well, you needed more basal insulin then. So now you've got this high number. You're bolusing at it, but you haven't addressed the basal. So now the bolus is just making up for the basal. It's not affecting the high blood sugar. That I know makes sense to you. You and I have been talking long enough now. You know more about this than you're giving yourself credit for. I can tell.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, and so I would end up telling you, though I don't give advice on the podcast, if I was going to give you advice, I would say something to you after talking to you for 37 minutes and 48 seconds. I would tell you something that I end up telling most people, even when I speak to them privately. You really should trust yourself more. Just trust your gut a little bit. You know what I mean? Like yeah. That. And if I told you that ends up being the thing that I say to more people, and it ends up being probably the best advice they ever get. It's just at some point when you're seeing something that doesn't make sense, and either what you've been told or what you're scared into believing or what your doctor has said is conflicting with the common sense of what you're seeing in the moment, you need to trust yourself at that moment. I like sincerely believe that. And when you have a Dexcom CGM, you can be a little more risky, right? Like, because you've got a little bit of backup. You can always, and even if you didn't have a CGM, you could test more. There's things you could do. You don't have to sit and stare at a 300. What do you think of that? You think you could do that?
I know I can do that, yes.
Kelly, you had a baby when you were 10. You could definitely do that.
That's right. That's funny. I'm from Utah. What can I say?
So let's digress for 1 second. I'm from Utah. What can I say? So did a boy just walk up to you and go, "Hey, you, let's do it"? And you were like, "Right, let's get married and have a kid."
No. They just say those. Us people in Utah get married young.
Yeah, well, I guess is it the mountains? What is it? What does it exactly? Do you think?
I don't know what does it.
It could be the thin air. So okay. So I posted something online. I'm going to go back maybe a week or so ago, and I totally put it up because I hope people feel more emboldened, right? And so it is the 14-day, I don't know if you use the little mobile Clarity app for Dexcom, but I love that little app. Like, you open up the app. I'll do it right now. Let's
By app, you mean on your computer or on your phone?
On my phone. It's this little app. It's the Dexcom Clarity, but it's the small kind of like, it's not the one for your computer. It's a companion app. And when I
had no idea it existed.
All right, I'll put a link in the show notes. So you click on it, and you say, "I want to view my data view PDF," and it creates a PDF file of the last 14 days of your blood sugars, and it gives you some information, right?
Okay, yeah.
And so when I just generated a new one, but the one I put online was from the December 22nd to January 4th, 2016 to 2017. And Arden's estimated A1C in the app was 5.8. Her average glucose was 119. It gives standard deviation, how many times I calibrated during on average, the percentage amount of time she stayed in range and high. She was high 13.1% of the time. She was in range 74.7% of the time. She was low 12.2% of the time. It considers low anything under, I think, 70, because that's where I set it. Mm-hmm. And so I put this thing up and I said, look, I think you just need to remember a few things. Be bold with insulin. Bump and nudge blood sugars pre-bolus. And then I added something that I just think is a new part of my mantra for me about diabetes. And in the end, what I said was, I think diabetes is understanding the limitations of man-made insulin. Like, I think it might be more that than anything else as I consider it. So if I don't understand what insulin will and won't do, then there's no real way for me to use it effectively. And that's a bigger idea, but you get that information back every day when you're using it. I did this and this happened. I did this and nothing happened. Like I bolused now, but her blood sugar didn't start moving for 25 minutes. And even though it seems like there's this endless deluge of ideas that can change why things are happening, different inputs that ruin, what you think is going to happen. I think in the end, after you've done it enough times, it really does begin to make sense. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, it's different than it is at 8 o'clock in the morning, than it is at 2 o'clock in the morning, et cetera, et cetera. But you do it enough times and you just know. I walked into her room last night and she had a tough time doing her homework before she went to bed, and she was upset and her blood sugar started going up. And even though she was falling asleep, I was aggressive with it. I stopped the arrow from going up. I leveled off her blood sugar and I got her back to I think it was 101 last night. It sat overnight at 101 for a while. About an hour and a half before she got up, it started going up again. And I thought, I think this pump's done. I think the infusion set's done. And that's something to remember, right? That if you go all the way back to, I never talk about this, but I mean to. I had Aaron Kowalski on from the JDRF a long time ago. And in the middle of a very long conversation at some point, he makes this, he makes a point to say that the cannulas aren't what they need to be. And he was talking about the industry in general. We need more research to make better cannulas, because that's where so many problems come from. And I was like, wow, it is, right? You stick this cannula in from your pump, and at some point, we call them fancy. We say they get occluded, or whatever ends up happening. Your insulin will crystallize inside the tube and block the flow. Whatever the reasoning is, at some point, that cannula stops being as effective of a delivery system as it was the minute you put it in, which is true across the board for every insulin pump. And so when I see Arden's blood sugar starting to go up for literally no reason that I can tell, and her pump site's going to expire in 9 hours or 8 hours or 7 hours, I start thinking maybe it's that. And I'll give a big bolus, and if it doesn't move the way I think it's supposed to, boom, we're changing the pump. That's it. Don't mess around. But it took me years to get to that point. You know what I mean? It's not something I figured out overnight. You don't yank insulin pumps off willy-nilly, in your first 18 months.
Right. They cost too much money.
They cost money, and there's insulin in them, and blah, blah, blah. And exactly. I don't want to poke my kid any more than I have to, and all the other reasons that go into it. But eventually you'll get to this calm place where you're like, look, the insulin pump costs money, but if I have to use 3 extra ones this month or 3 extra infusion sets this month to avoid a day and a half of high blood sugars, then what's the point? Of course I'm going to do that.
Completely worth it.
Right. And so that's it right there. I mean, I'm going to sit and talk in an episode coming up soon about that idea. But in the end, we have to understand the limitations of what we're using, whether it's the limitation of the cannula or if it's the limitation of your insulin. But I think the biggest point of this right now that I've hit on is it's the limitation of the insulin. If you don't understand how it works, then you're not using it as effectively as you could be. And so, and that's a trust your gut situation. You have to look at what you know and believe it's going to happen again. And
that's why I'm so trying hard to get there with that, but I think I just always, you defaulted to, we must need to change the pump, and I default to, it must be puberty. Right. Puberty. Yeah. Puberty's doing this because we see those random rises that just don't make any sense to me, and I think, is that puberty? Do I need to change this basal every day? Do I need to be taking notes every day?
And so, going back to what I said before, in that moment, short term, I think the answer needs to be, doesn't matter why it's happening.
Doesn't matter. Just fix it.
There's not enough insulin, right? And if there's not enough insulin because she requires more basal because of the time of day or because of the food you ate or because of the activity she's doing, then give her more insulin. If it's not enough insulin because it's being restricted by the little piece of tubing that delivers it in, then do it. If the pump's been out in the heat and now the insulin's not as effective, so you need more to make it work, then in the end, the answer always is, I need more insulin. Right. And the reason is, in the moment, meaningless. And to think that you're going to, in that moment, go through all of these data points and make complete sense of this for the rest of your life is unreasonable. What I'll tell you is that over time, it will just all start making sense. So don't spend your time in this moment trying to figure out something that in that second, you don't have enough information to come up with an answer. Keep living, keep collecting data until one day it just all magically makes sense. And I haven't said this on the podcast in a while, but I'm going to go back to it. If you go at this diabetes thing with good intent long enough, at some point, just like in The Matrix, which is now probably such an old movie that no one's ever seen it.
I'm old, so I've seen it.
Everything slows down. and you have time to move out of the way of the bullet before it gets to you. Like it really will slow down at some point. And you can't spend now beating yourself up about it to the point that by the time you get down that road and you would have had all this time in the simulator and this knowledge that you could have used, that you've so beaten yourself up about it that it's all lost on you at that point. Does any of that make sense?
No, yeah, it all makes complete sense. The living in the moment part, fixing it in the moment. But at what point, with your daughter, do you look at it and go, okay, there's been 7 days of this or 8 days of this. I think I need to make a basal change or change a ratio.
Well, so I would say this. Then my answer to that is I wouldn't go more than to make an actual change to a basal. I wouldn't let it go for 6 hours. I might not make a static change. I might not go into her settings and say now from 8 to 9 it's this. Right. But I might just temp. I temp basal a lot.
You do it a lot.
Yeah. So,
but to make that constant change to the basal, go in the settings and fix it. Would you look at 6 days? At 5 a.m. all of a sudden her blood sugar just started going up. So we must be having a growth spurt or I don't know, whatever happens at 6 a.m. Time to make a change.
I see what you're saying. I definitely do. What I can tell you is this is where I'm not very helpful to people because
you just have a really good memory, I think.
No, my brain doesn't work like that. Like I wouldn't say, I can't look back and go, I know this has happened over and over again. It's just a vibe. It's a feeling. It's like, it's that idea where like, hey, this has been going on too long. You know what I mean? Like I'm done. Hey, I'm done with this. And I've shortened my, I think I've shortened my ability to accept those high blood sugars enough that it hits me pretty quickly. I'm like, you know what? This has been 2 days of this. It's not the pump. It's not the insulin. She doesn't seem sick. Anything, all the myriad of reasons are out the window. She needs more insulin. It seems, oh my God, excuse me. I belched in a way that I'm pretty sure I'm going to edit that out later. And I really don't edit much at all, but people, if you hear like a gap of silence a second ago, I cut out a burp. Excuse me. And so I just I won't accept those high blood sugars. And by that, I mean, when she needs more insulin, I give her more insulin. If it makes her low 4 hours from now, I will deal with that 4 hours from now. So how often do you go in and change the settings in her pot? Like across the board PDM setting changes, a couple of times a year.
Oh, wow. So you just mess with the basal all the time.
Or even her insulin to carb ratios. Like, if I bolus for something, that she's eaten before and I don't get the same response out of it and it happens again and again, then I just adjust her insulin to carb ratios. To say that there's some sort of formula for how I do that would be an actual lie. So I just go in and I'm like, her blood sugar was this, she ate this, her blood sugar went up 60 points higher than I thought it was going to. It took another, unit to get it back to where it's supposed to be. So in my mind, that unit should have been in the initial bolus. So how do I need to change the insulin to carb ratio so that next time she has 50 carbs, there's an extra unit in it? So I use my kind of data from the past to make a decision about that. I don't say that, because a doctor will tell you, well, move it 20% or move it 30%, or we like to say that you should move it 8% or this, like, that's just guessing. Right. Like that's all just random guessing. Well, based on what I tell most of my patients, all whose A1Cs are 9.5, we move it 8%, we move it 10%. Well, does that really work? Not really. But at least it's not too much. Yeah. Well, I don't want to move it too much either. And I'm not suggesting you should either. I'm suggesting that what happened. You bolused X amount of insulin. They ate this meal. Their blood sugar ended up at this high number. It took this much more insulin to bring it back down. Hence, that's the amount of insulin you needed somehow up front. Maybe it was split between basal and bolus. Maybe it was just bolus. That's for you to decide. But that's the answer. Right?
I think you're the diabetes whisperer.
Yeah, not really. If I told you how I flunked out of 8th grade algebra, you would never listen to me, because I just set up basically an algebraic formula about diabetes, right? If, then, this, that kind of stuff. And so, take this in the parentheses and put it over here. But it's really not that. Let's simplify it down to dummy terms, which is why people love my podcast, because I sound like a moron when I'm talking. And so let's dumb it down, right? If your blood sugar goes up, you didn't have enough insulin. If you gave yourself more insulin and it went back to where it belonged, that's the total amount of insulin that moment required.
You need to add, right?
That's all. Now, what happened? You mistimed it. So if you put 10 units in for a meal and they end up at 200 and you use 2 more units to get them back to where you wanted, well, then the meal needed 12 units. You used the 12 units, and in the end, you got what you wanted. But had you timed the 12 units better, you never would have been up to 200.
Right.
That's it. Timing. It's simple. We've turned something. And now people are throwing their iPhones now. I don't mean it's simple like, hey, if you don't have it, it's simple. How do you not have it? It took me a really, really long time to come up with this. Like, this is not something I just sat down one day and said, hey, my daughter has diabetes. You know what I think? I think this, and this. It's why the podcast is important to me, because we do this all the time online. We give people just enough information for that one moment, and then we put them into another problem later. No one ever just comes out and says, here's the collection of my thoughts. And that's why I think this is great. You know what I mean? Like, I really do. I'm genuinely thrilled when I get emails from people and they're like, hey, our A1C went down 2 points. Like, 3 months of listening to a podcast, our A1C went down 2 points. I feel so good about that, In the end, to paint a really flowery metaphor, we're all walking down the same path and it's unlit. Some of us started before others. There is no reason why the people up ahead shouldn't turn back and yell down the path, hey, you're about to come up on a hole in the road. Walk to the left. You know what I mean? Like that's just sense. It's common sense. I used to say this thing when I was younger and I was philosophizing in my 20s. I would always say, and it's funny, it comes up with you. I would always say, like, how many times does a 15-year-old girl need to go on Maury Povich before 15-year-old girls realize getting pregnant when you're 14 is not a great idea, right? But the problem is that it's the problem, and it's the beauty of humanity, is we reset every time. Every time there's a new generation, we reset. We start over again. A baby comes out and don't know anything. And it's taught by the people who parent it. And they've forgotten things or didn't learn some things or learn more. Think one thing's more important than another. But in the end, you don't get this complete data. You don't start with this imperial, a book of lessons to start with. It doesn't work that way. And that's how life works, and that's acceptable. It doesn't have to work that way for diabetes. But if you stop and look at it, it does. You sit down with an endocrinologist who's been an endocrinologist for 10 years. She's got a nurse practitioner who's been at it for 3 years. She's seen some things that work and some things that don't, but she hasn't really lived with it much. And she gives you this sort of scattered amount of information. And then you're supposed to weave it all together and turn yourself into a diabetes guru. And that's all well and good when I'm growing up and learning about the world and deciding if I want to be liberal or conservative or care about, people's feelings, or if I just want to be out for myself or anything. You have a whole life to figure those out. You do not have a whole life to figure out diabetes. You need I want people to fast forward to the part where they go, oh yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that. That's all. That's the whole goal of the podcast. If everybody in the world that has diabetes emails me and says they have it, I'll stop putting the podcast on. Until then, we're going to do this.
I was going to say good luck. Good luck with that goal.
Well, it's a big goal. But in the end, like, I do know that I hear back from endos sometimes. They're like, hey, I listened to the podcast and that makes sense. And I don't know why I hold back that information from my patients. Or I didn't know that. Or, it's no one's fault. And I hope I don't feel like I'm saying that. Yeah. It's the wild variability of being alive and having this disease and man-made insulin, blah, and all these other points, right? But I just hope that you get off the phone. You're not on the phone, but I hope you get off the podcast and you say, you know what, damn it, I'm going to do it. And then just do it. Because really, it's the only thing between you and that. There's a next step. You're right there. Like, I've spoken to enough people like you to tell you that you are on the other side of a paper door. All you have to do is walk forward and you'll be on the other side of it. But honestly.
I'm going to do it. I'm going to remember to Basal. Temp Basal.
Well, everything. Just boom. Just keep the consistency of be bold, use the technology, understand the limitations of the insulin. When you figure them out, apply them. Don't accept high blood sugars. Be careful of the lows. Test when you're not sure. That's it. It's pretty much it.
Everything you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Just do it. Just do it.
We can't say that because I believe that's copyrighted. But
probably.
Yeah, the Guy with Diabetes podcast rips off Nike.
We'll say do it. How about that?
I think it's just this. Be bold. Just be bold. And you know what, too? We're coming up on an hour, and I've talked way more in this one than I intended to, and I apologize for that. But I haven't done this in a few weeks, so I get a little...
You're good.
Yeah, I get a little... I talk too much. But I heard from somebody recently who said, I'm with it. I've been bold with insulin. This was an adult, not a parent. But they had a low, a scary low from it. And I said, are you going to be able to keep going? And they're like, I'm figuring it out right now. And that's a different world. When you're an adult living alone, it's different. You know what I mean? It's different. Can I be that aggressive if there's no one here to be my backup? And I don't know the answer to that. And I think maybe the answer is it's more difficult. Or no, or I don't know. It's not my situation, but I get that that's the situation. But when you're in this space where you're the caregiver of somebody with type 1, what my hope is that this aggressive nature will carry you through to when the technology can now make these decisions for you. And I do think that's coming. I mean, probably sooner than later, but the idea of artificial pancreas, an Omnipod and a Dexcom CGM working in Congress with each other to keep your blood sugar from getting too high or too low, it seems to me from everything I've seen so far that that's a very real, not a long off idea. So until then, let's not accept poor health. You know what I mean? Let's do our best not to accept it. If it happens, like you said, you dust off and you keep going. But you don't have to sit and stare at a 300 blood sugar and just say, well, I don't know what to do. My endo said to wait 3 hours and bolus and test again. I don't know what that means.
That was one of the things I was going to ask, because when I just went to the endocrinologist last week, and they pulled up on my data, mm-hmm. and they're looking at it, and they said, why did you correct after it had only been an hour and a half since your last correction? Because I'm trying to be bold with insulin. We were stuck at 312. I remember the exact number. And in an hour and a half, we had not moved.
Yeah.
So it makes sense to me to give her more insulin, but I got a little lecture on that while I was there.
Why do you think?
I just said, the insulin was stuck at 300. It hadn't moved. Why would I wait another hour and a half for that blood sugar to come down? But she gave me a little lecture, but I did ignore it. I just ignored her.
Oh, we can't say outright that it's okay to ignore medical advice, but I think you did a great thing there. And so, listen. I
ignored her for the situation that we were in because I knew what I did was right. And I think that's where I have, I love our endocrinologist and I love the diabetes educator, but they just look at the data that's printed in front of them, and I can remember the exact situation.
Right.
And I can tell, they looked at one morning, it had been my husband who had done it, and they said, well, why did he give her a unit and a half? He should have only given her a half unit. And I said, because she'd been high all night long and it hadn't moved.
Yeah, if we follow what you're saying, we might as well just give up now. But thank you. And it just, listen, they're not there.
Yeah.
Does your endo have diabetes?
She does not. One of the diabetes educators that we meet with does, but the other two I've met with.
Do you think the educator would have told you why did you bolus again?
Probably not.
Yeah. Okay.
So, this is actually the first time anybody has ever really questioned what we have done, mm-hmm. but I have gotten a lot bolder with insulin in the last little bit because I'm tired of the highs, and she's tired of them. She doesn't feel good when she's high.
No, listen, you have to be cautious and careful.
Right.
It's not my job to put a disclaimer everywhere. Insulin's dangerous. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's also the situation you're in. So I mean, I think you need to make the better of it. Not, maybe you'll never make the best of it. It's not that easy, but you can't just. It's just a strange idea. Like I don't know. I got my foot caught in a bear trap, but the guy said he's going to be in here in 5 minutes to take the bear trap off. It's been an hour, but I mean, he said he's coming. But it just, like, I don't know what are you saying? Take the trap off yourself. Reach down and grab it and pull it off yourself. Like, why? Why? Because it might snap back and cut your finger off too. It's already cutting off your foot. We're acting like everything's perfect, and it just doesn't work like this. It really doesn't. I wish it did. I wish that diabetes was something that someone could give you static information about that would always make sense. I wish it was, you have high blood pressure, take this pill in the morning.
Right. And when I left the hospital, when my daughter was diagnosed, that's what I thought. I thought, okay, the ratios are this, the basal's this, we got it. This is easy.
Not a problem.
But, yeah, I woke up from that dream world in about 24 hours.
Yeah. All right, so stay awake and keep going. I really should ask you if there's anything else you want to say, since I spoke over most of your time.
No, I think we covered it all.
Excellent.
Don't blame everything on puberty. That's what I
don't blame puberty.
You've got your title right there.
Yeah, I might go with that. That's not bad. Because the other idea was it took me 7 months to get Kelly on the podcast.
We could go with that too. I know. And I'm just a stay-at-home mom with nothing to do. But yeah, I'm kind of busy.
There was so many moments where like, oh, we can't do it here, we can't do it there, we can't do it. I'm having shoulder surgery. This happened in my life. That I was like, this woman's, by the time she gets on, they're going to cure diabetes.
Yeah, that would have been nice. Darn it. We should have waited.
All right. Well, listen, the moment they cure it, I'll have you back on.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really genuinely appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
This episode ended up being so amazing. I can't believe it took this much time to put on. 7 months of trying to get Kelly on the podcast. Then I recorded it and I sat on it for 6 more months before I put it out. I feel bad, but there was other stuff that had to go up first. If you're enjoying the Juicebox podcast, please tell a friend. It's the most valuable thing you can do to help the show. Tell a friend. Show them how to get a podcast. Show them how to subscribe. Now, beyond that, if you're really feeling good about the podcast, go to iTunes and leave a rating and a review for the show. But I just can't say enough about how difficult it is for some people to find podcasts. So if you can share on social media, hey, I was listening to the Juicebox Podcast today with a link. You can link to juiceboxpodcast.com, or you can link back to iTunes or link back to Google Play or wherever you're listening. That would be monumentally helpful, and I would really genuinely appreciate it. Thank you very much, Dexcom and Omnipod, for sponsoring the show. You can go to dexcom.com/juicebox to find out more about Dexcom and their CGM. And you can go to myomnipod.com/juicebox to find out more about the world's only tubeless insulin pump. One last thing, I try very hard to respond to everybody's emails and notes on Facebook and Twitter and everything, and I think I get you all, but in case I don't, I just want to tell you how much I genuinely appreciate hearing about your successes, your good feelings about the podcast. All that stuff means the world to me. Please keep sending those notes. I really do enjoy getting them. All right, we'll be back next week with another episode of the podcast. I hope you guys are having a great summer.